On October 8, 2018, Hurricane Michael underwent a 48-hour rapid intensification period where it went from a Category 1 hurricane to a Category 4 hurricane. By landfall on October 10, 2018 at 12:30 p.m. Central Time, Hurricane Michael was an unprecedented for the region Category 5 hurricane, making landfall near Tyndall Air Force Base, Florida. Hurricane Michael was the strongest hurricane in recorded history to make landfall on the Florida Panhandle. Landing with sustained winds of 161 miles per hour and a minimum pressure of 919 millibars, the storm was the fourth most powerful hurricane to hit the United States, spreading devastation far inland through many counties in northwestern Florida, from Bay County, Gulf County, Calhoun County, even through Jackson County and Leon County, where the state capital is located. Hurricane Michael was unique in that it maintained its major hurricane status all the way through the Florida-Georgia state line. As it entered Seminole County, Georgia, it was still a strong Category 3 hurricane. Across northwestern Florida and into the state of Georgia, Hurricane Michael was responsible for $25 billion in damages. These are the 31 voices of Hurricane Michael, representing the many unique experiences and perspectives of the community members who endured the storm and its impacts. Voices of hope, empathy, pain, lessons learned, grit, determination, and extensive insight into one of the most catastrophic hurricane seasons the Florida Panhandle has ever encountered. I'm meteorologist Melissa Thomas, and allow me to introduce you to welcome to another episode of Hurricane Michael's Voice. So far, we have explored perspectives of nurses, 911 dispatchers, firefighters, victim advocates, and we have not yet got to speak with a helper right out the gates for Hurricane Michael's landfall on October 10th, 2018, that is brought up a lot in the interviews. You hear about them all the time, the National Guard. So now we're going to speak with Jacob Thomas, who's a part of the National Guard, Army National Guard, and activated for Michael's landfall last year. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
I'll also tell you he's also my sweetheart. Yeah. And there'll be a little bit of my story that overlaps with his as well, and some interesting nuances as far as a meteorologist and storm chaser goes, paired with a first responder
That's fair.
Partner who had some insights to share with me pre-landfall that I think are really important, and a lot of storm chasers and meteorologists and helpers in general can take heed from for future storm events. But first, before we get into all of that, so much to get into, let's start with, how was Panama City home to you to begin with, pre-Hurricane Michael?
We moved to the area in 1996, 97, so freshman in high school, about 22 years ago. And we just moved for my sister and my brother, and
you've been here ever since?
Off and on. I've moved away for a year or two for school, but like this has been home since the late 90s for sure. Yes.
A lot of your formative years.
Yeah.
It's home.
It's home.
How long were you in the Army National Guard?
I have been in for 12 years as of October 15th.
Okay. So a significant amount of time in the service before this event.
A little bit. Yep.
Have you worked other natural disasters?
I have worked 3 hurricanes total, including Michael. So I worked 2 before Michael, and I've been activated for probably a half a dozen. It didn't cause enough damage, didn't threaten the infrastructure enough to heat us going there. So we stood down.
And you would say you had a little bit of experience moving into this because of that?
Yeah.
That summer rolls around, 2018. Are you thinking hurricane? Or did it kind of sneak up on you? What kind of preparation did you get leading up to that week?
Personally, or just in general?
Go the Guard route.
Go the Guard. So in general, it sounds bad, I'm laissez-faire with the Guard. I'm always ready for drill and for training, and that's all I can really prep for. So we do a lot of field drills. So when we go out for training, we go out for no running water, no electricity. We're sleeping in the woods, no shelter. So in general, I'm almost always ready to go with maybe about an hour prep time just to make sure I got everything packed away right.
With landfall being on October 10th, that Wednesday, when did you first start getting notifications that you'd be a part of this event, that you might be activated?
We were warned maybe 2 days prior. My timeline's a little messed up, but you told me it was going to be a pretty big one. And the guard said they notified us we were going to be potentially activated maybe a few hours before you told me it was going to be bad.
Score.
Yeah. So I was wrong. So I prepped my stuff, but like I said, it was pretty much all done. I was just making sure I had the important things, grabbed some extra batteries, that kind of thing.
And with being activated for an event in your hometown, that's actually pretty rare, isn't it?
It is. So in general, when we're activated for a hurricane, the soldiers who are inside the area where the hurricane's going to damage don't normally get activated. That's the way they can stay home, look at the families, they can evacuate the families so they can take care of their loved ones. We didn't have enough time. So I had, with your forewarning and with the National Guard alerting me, I basically called my mother and my sister and everybody I cared about, told them to leave town. And I prepped and I was at the station the next morning. So I went to the Armory the next morning with all my gear.
And the morning before that, I had returned back to school in Tallahassee. And once landfall started to become kind of an imminent situation, I really wanted to come back into town.
Yeah, you did.
And I will never forget the conversation that we did have.
Conversations.
Plural. Of why it would not have been a good idea for me to come back in, regardless of my position as a student meteorologist or storm chaser, for a certain aspect that I thought was really unique, that I appreciated.
Well, from a personal standpoint and just experience, your liability if you don't have a way out or a way to take care of yourself. And in general, one person, two person, small teams tend to be liabilities, because all it takes is for your vehicle to get stuck, for a tree limb to damage something, and your liability. Now you become something where the local resources have to deal to get you out of it. So unless, like, I generally cringe when I see people coming into town, but like Red Cross, for example, they have a huge logistics supply. They can take care of themselves. Team Rubicon, they do the same thing. The military, police, EMS, they all have logistics where they can self-recover, basically. And then individuals coming in and out, that's kind of, yeah, you can get in and get out 9 times out of 10, but it only takes once. What I always tell people is follow local guidance.
Yeah.
So if they're telling you to evacuate, if you're not a part of the disaster recovery, you should evacuate.
And the storm chaser heart in me did not like hearing that conversation. I heeded it. And you know, in hindsight, thinking on a professional front, how did I want to put my first foot into the professional world of meteorology? I was already teetering on if I wanted to go storm chaser or professional meteorologist route. And after that conversation, it was a no-brainer. So I hung out of town for landfall. Yeah. You take shelter for landfall Tuesday night. You're in, which high school were you in?
So I was in Rutherford. Our unit, there about 80 of us showed up on ground, about 80, 81, something like that. That was all that could get to the Armory within that time frame. And we split in half, basically. So about 40 of us went to Rutherford High School and 40 of us stayed at the Armory. And that way, if the damage was serious at one site, the other site could come and help them recover. So we wouldn't just all be stuck somewhere and be useless.
How was landfall that morning?
So with Michael, I actually had less responsibility than normal. We had a lot of the senior people were there. So all I really had to do was focus on internal safety, like look after my soldiers, medical, that stuff. I wasn't in charge of the shelter or anything like that. So we set up base in Rutherford Gymnasium. We got a lecture not to make it messy because, you know, they were being nice to us, letting us stay there. And so we went in there thinking like, okay, the hurricane's going to hit. There's going to be some damage. At that time, it was still a 3, so we figured we'd clear some routes, call it a day. We may be activated for 3 or 4 days tops.
Rutherford was my alma mater, high school, so I thought that was sweet that you were there. Yeah. When the actual landfall occurs in that couple of hour period between 11:30, 12:30 landfall 1 and 2,
What was that experience like, being in the shelter with everyone at the intense part of actual landfall?
So we were actually separated from the civilians. We're on ourselves because we weren't running the shelter. We ourselves were just sheltering there ourselves.
Oh, okay. Good.
So we weren't actually running it.
Yeah.
But we were in the gymnasium, separated from everybody else. There was some other active duty Army guys that were taking shelter there, and we just held tight in the gymnasium. It was designed, I want to say, for a Cat 5 hurricane, and we just watched that roof began to leak a little bit here and there, so we put some trash cans under that. And then maybe towards the end of the first wall that hit, the ceiling itself actually started peeling up. And it's a very colorful story. I don't know if you want me to get into about that.
You don't have to be explicit, but I think it's very interesting what mankind has a tendency to do in the most outlandish of experiences they're going through.
So they want to video record it.
Yep.
They want to take their selfies and do their Instagrams. So a lot of our soldiers, the younger ones, had the cameras out and they're videoing the ceiling pulling down, like peeling off, the rain coming in. And I'm just kind of watching the ceiling lose integrity, and stuff was starting to flap enough to where it was going to fall. And I had to cuss a little bit to get them back to reality and tell them to get to our secondary shelter. So we had our primary shelter was the main gymnasium, and secondary was inner rooms.
I think the most interesting part of that story, when you told me the first time, is that people tend to get so busy taping one part of it that their focus is off the rest of their peripheral. They don't realize the roof's coming off over their head, busy watching another part of the roof go off. I thought that was very unique, and probably something I would do. Just future reference.
That's another reason why I asked you not to come in.
Surfacing from it post landfall, what was that like? Crawling out into, now you've gone from sheltering, now it's work time. What was that like?
So it started off immediately. So somehow someone got news to one of our soldiers in the gymnasium that there was a pregnant woman with a broke foot trapped in her house. And that was just like 3.5 miles away. So we didn't have any communication with our command. We were separated. So we had platoon level leadership, maybe even like a captain there. So squadron. So leadership designed for about 100, 150 people, but we were separated from our main command. So we decided to go out and get her. And that was just as the last part of the wall was leaving. So there were still gusts of 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. And we headed out in an ambulance, me, my platoon sergeant, and then 2 other guys for self-recovery followed us and went out to pick her up. So it was about 3.5 miles away. It took us just shy of 3 hours to get there. Yeah, we were driving over power line poles, over trees, over brushes, through ditches. And at one point we pushed over a fence. We drove through a gentleman's yard. He was actually sitting out on his porch drinking a beer, and he just didn't even skip a beat, just watched us drive through his yard. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Sorry.
Oh no, continue.
And there are several times where the water on 98, I guess that's where it's out that direction, that main road. It was easily 2.5 feet deep, and our Humvee's out 40 equipment, which we didn't have, is only rated for 36
you took
inches.
The question right out of my mouth.
Yeah.
The vehicles you're using to maneuver this terrain and obstacles, potentially live wires and trees. You have vehicles that are made to do that.
Yes, the Humvees in general. So we have a very basic ambulance without fording equipment. So it can go through water, no problem, at about 36 inches, 3 feet. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. It's enough to sweep you off your feet and carry you away. So we were able to do it.
What were the next couple of days like in that situation?
Pretty hectic. Our first day initially, so landfall was Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So our first day initially, besides getting that lady, we spent the whole day clearing her out back to the armory. That took us all day. So we got to the point where we could get to our armory and back out again, but it's tactical vehicles only. There's a lot of off-roading. We had to drive through a church properties at one point. It was pretty bad.
And the entire time that you're working this, is there guard around Florida and other states trying to get to you and set up?
So due to the speed of the buildup of the hurricane, the guard had already mobilized. Usually, for example, when we responded to Matthew or
You have a
Irma,
week in advance.
we have a ton of time. Like we see it spinning up. We already got our stuff. We prep. We drive out. We usually sit. We try to stay outside of the hurricane, and then we drive in. And that's what they did too. But
professional meteorologists were caught off guard by this. That's just how fast it blew up.
So they were spun up and they were prepping and they were getting all their stuff together, but they were still on the way in. Linemen were on the way in. First day I saw linemen, so that was pretty interesting. And then, but for the most part, all we saw was local police, local EMS, local fire.
And a little detour in this interview, I think this would be a good time to tell the stories in your interview, is that I can no longer date anybody else under the sun. While I'm stuck in Tallahassee trying to get in touch with my family, figure out what's going on. I think we had gotten word from my parents maybe 34 to 36 hours after landfall. Mm-hmm. But that was a day and a half of not knowing if your parents are alive or not. And all we got was a call. Someone had put a phone to their ear and we got to hear my dad's voice. He was alive. Cool. But that's all we got because that person had to move on to recovery instantly. So I heard his voice and that was it. And he made his way to my parents, brought them water, brought them gas, checked in on them, gave me the most huge debriefing of actually what their situation looked like, was comforting, how well they were doing. And he is now the apple of my dad's eye.
We were given Thursday. We were actually given a day pass to go check in on our families and friends. Oh. I got 2 10-gallon things of water, and I made my way back home here, Panama City Beach. All I had was like a little bit of damage to my storm door. That was it. Everything else was fine. I then, at that point, I already gotten phone calls from a lot of families and friends. So checked on my sister's brother-in-law's family, my sister's place. They were all evacuated. A lot of my Army buddies who were stationed elsewhere called me. I checked in on their parents, and then I checked in on your parents as well. I couldn't make it to your house. I had to park about 2 blocks away and carry the water cans up there.
Yeah, that's what I say. Essentially crawl over debris to get to their property.
I was crawling over linemen. They had 2 or 3 trucks. They were already working on Cherry Street. Oh. Yeah, they were doing work. And then by the time I got to your dad, though, he's my last stop. I only had like maybe 2 gallons of water. So I dumped it in his thing.
He'll never forget it.
And that was that. And then I had 24 hours off and I just went back to work.
24 hours to check personal stuff and then you're back to work.
I only took like 8 hours because that's how long it took me to get to your dad's house. I thought about coming home and sleeping, but I didn't have power. I didn't have water and I wasn't going to do anything but think about work. So I just went back to the Army.
How long were you on duty before you were relieved?
12 days, 14 days. So the first part of the other National Guard unit started coming in less than a week after, but they were still prepping, setting up logistics, working their side. They didn't have enough manpower to fully just let us go. Yeah. So we worked a solid 12 days afterwards. So
before you were relieved of duty, did you have any stations in Mexico Beach?
I wasn't stationed in Mexico Beach. I was actually stationed in Port St. Joe, but all our missions were in Mexico Beach. So we go and sleep the night in Port St. Joe and wake up in the morning and come back to Mexico Beach. Or if some guys were on guard duty, so they're holding down roadblocks essentially, and they would stay the night there and we'd come in and relieve them every so often. So.
With the first response task teams that are familiar with hurricanes that are more civilian run, that are posted up outside of hurricane disaster zones, that zoom in to help as soon as they can, using the experience and knowledge that they've garnered from their own experiences, was there any, I guess, either on your part or your superior's part of coordinating with teams like that? Did you get to work with them directly? And how was that getting to?
I didn't work directly with the coordination part. That's Emergency Operations Center stuff. But Port St. Joe had a major one and Bay County had a major one. I wasn't actually a part of the coordination, but yes, I worked with local law quite a few times on roadblocks, worked with
like task forces that came from other cities like Louisiana. I always thought that was interesting that there are task forces that come from like Hurricane Katrina, situations, or if they were involved with Irma. So they're coming up to help out.
So
then you would be, if you're first on scene with a lot of these people, then I figured you might be working with them directly.
I didn't get
among them.
I didn't get out to Mexico Beach until 2 or 3 days after.
Okay.
So a lot of those civilians, their sole job is like search and rescue, SAR teams. So that's what they do on the civilian side. Building collapses, tunnels, enclosed spaces, water rescue, all that kind of stuff. As a guard, or at least with my level of training, I'm just a generic medic. We can do some of that stuff, like water rescue. We wouldn't really do any legit SAR stuff because that's just super dangerous. But that's what those teams are doing. That's what they do as civilians. That's what they do all the time. They're so much better at it than we are.
Yeah.
We do have some specialized units in the Florida National Guard, but the 80 of us there weren't one of them.
Yeah.
So our main job was we supported the local resources. So we supported the police, we supported fire and EMS, stuff like that, cleared routes. So we didn't get to do any of the super hardcore search and rescue, at least not a lot of us did.
But you still went in relatively soon after landfall, though. So as a young adult that spent many years of his life in Bay County visiting Mexico Beach, was that hard to roll in?
Yeah, I was getting lost.
Yeah.
The buildings and trees I used to use for landmarks to turn off the major roads weren't there anymore. So I drove by the first day we were going to the armory. We actually drove by the Lisenby. We didn't recognize it. So we actually ended up going a little past it before we turned around. Out in Mexico Beach, I didn't get out there that much, but I used to vacation, like go camping at Cape San Blas. So we drive through Mexico Beach. And when we got out there, it's just, if you've never been in the area, just think of an idyllic, small little beach town, like what Seaside was 20 years ago. And that was that. And then just all the houses were everywhere. There was one house in the middle of the road we had to drive around. Roads were washed out at some points. We had to go loop around them. It was rough.
And actually, while we're on the note, part of the project is to bring a perspective to how you moved through the situation in a way that others in the future can learn from and or identify with if they go through a similar situation. So if you were speaking to a young soldier who is about to get activated for his home and he has there's no other route, he's about to work his home's disaster, would you have any tips for that person and how to navigate it as best as possible?
Keep your head down. Keep doing your job. If you look at it too big of a picture, it's overwhelming. If you realize that large disasters like this is just a bunch of little steps and a bunch of little fixes that eventually fix the whole thing, it's a little bit more done. So just focus on what you can get done in a day, 2 days, 3 days, and just keep doing that over and over again. It's the best way I can explain it.
That's good advice for everybody
just
involved in a situation like this.
Just keep your head down, keep working.
I like it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as far as the anniversary is already moved by, as of the taping of this interview, October 30th, 2019. So the anniversary of Hurricane Michael was October 10th, 2019, the 1-year anniversary. What would you say what are your hopes for the future? Do you think we're on the right track as far as a county, and any insight you want to lend to the rebuild? Because I know, speaking as your sweetheart, we're not going anywhere. Not going anywhere. So
I don't know if I have much insight. I always keep my head down on that. Yeah. I just focus on what I'm trying to do. Panama City in general has come super far. It's almost normal again. There's a lot of businesses still shut down, but there's not trees falling all over everything. Everybody has power, internet, water, so that's nice.
Your local grocery store is open?
Most local grocery stores are open. Not some of the restaurants, though, unfortunately. Mexico Beach is still recovering a little bit, but they had their coffee shop and pizza joint was up and running pretty quick. That's nice. It's a slow process. I don't think there is ever going to be the same, but it's going to grow and rebuild, and they'll have different aspects that we'll come to love.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And
did I have a choice?
I didn't poke and prod him that hard. Okay, I let him offer. But thank you.
You did. Yeah, it's a pleasure.